Hello learners, welcome back to Milo e-learning. So today we're going to be doing part 2 of grade 6 history, and the topic is explorers from Europe. Now you probably wanted to know, why would the Europeans form a trade route to the east via southern Africa? So the Europeans had seen valuable goods that came from the east, namely which was spices and silk, and the trade of these spices and silk were controlled by the Arabs. And once the spices and silk reached Europe, the Italian cities basically took control over them. And the Italian cities became incredibly rich from this trade. So the European nations and also the Portuguese nations wanted to benefit from the spice trade as well. So they thought of new ideas and inventions that could make it possible for them to find a route to travel to the east. Now, the reasons for exploration of going all the way from Europe and round Africa to go to Asia, these were called the voyages of exploration. Now you must know that the Southern African society was at the height of power at the same time that the Renaissance was taking place. And the Europeans knew very, very little about Africa. You must know in term one history, you did about the rise of Makungubwe and Great Zimbabwe, and that was through the gold trade. And at that time, Africa was extremely rich because of this gold trade. And this one made it very curious for the Europeans to want to go and to explore. So they set off on the voyages of exploration to explore the world. Now you could see that they didn't only go to travel to the east, they also traveled to North America and South America and elsewhere. So you could ask yourself, what was one of the reasons why you can see here from Europe, I have the arrows. Now they traveled all this way and they accidentally came across Africa through a windstorm where they landed there. Now when they traveled from Europe and set around the Atlantic Ocean around Africa, you must know that this was a very, very long trip using wind technology, because you were using wind to sail. And the sailors were homesick, they tired, they ran out of food, they got sick, and if they didn't have medical supplies to cure them, some of them passed away. So these sailors were basically down and depressed, and they accidentally came across Africa. So this they set as a um, in between point to refresh, um, and to explore and to get their breath back before they set along the Indian Ocean to go back to India to get their spices. So by accident, Southern Africa became a base for the Europeans, um, so they could recuperate and refresh and then go to Asia for their spices. Now, they were very, very curious and they looked for new ideas and inventions. So, one of the things that the Europeans did was to invent the caravel. So, in the 14th century, they didn't have any ships to travel across the oceans. So to solve this problem, they built a caravel. And the caravel had two masts and two triangular sails, and the sailors used the wind to make the ship move. But as they were traveling, they needed direction. So the Chinese invented a compass, and the Europeans used this magnetic compass on their voyages of exploration to give them direction, and they could stay on the right course. Then the Chinese also developed gunpowder, and by the 15th century, the gunpowder reached Europe. And what happened was that these Europeans made cannons and firearms and put all of this with the gunpowder on their ships. And when they went on their voyages, they started conquering and attacking the people in the lands that they set sail to, and they started capturing that area. Now, the second reason, the first reason was for curiosity and looking for inventions and new ideas. The second reason for their exploration was they were looking for profit. Now, the Europeans didn't have everything that they needed. So they were actually trading with the Arabs across the Sahara Desert. But the Arabs were charging them high taxes, and they completely controlled the route over land, and the prices were very, very expensive, and it put the cost of things up. So the Europeans were basically looking for a cheaper way to go to Asia to trade, and this is they decided to use the sea as a trade route. Now, they knew very, very little about Africa and the East, and they learned through trial and error. So the Europeans were looking for gold and silver to make coins, and coins were beginning to be used uh, in exchange for goods instead of bartering. Previously, they used to barter. They used to trade one item for another, but now they started using money. And this is how the world started developing and the economy started developing because money was being invented. So they came to Africa to look for gold and silver so they could make the money. They were also looking to trade for directly to buy silk, and the Chinese had the perfect art of using silkworms to make beautiful clothes. And the rich people in Europe really wanted to wear silk clothing. Now, the last reason, or the third reason for the exploration was basically to spread Christianity. Now, the religion played an important growth in exploration. Religion was of the Europeans was basically Christianity, and they felt that they needed to reform and convert every individual that they came into contact with. So they decided to make them Christians because they believed that Christianity was the first religion and it was the first religion that was spread across the world. The Europeans had explorers had direction and navigation, and they were very religious, and they basically relied on their faith to get them through these very, very rough voyages. And by the 1500s, the Europeans were traveling by sea to almost every part of the world, and they set up missionaries in all these areas, and they colonized it and conquered it. Now, the people that did this, one of the first explorers was Bartholomew Dias. Now, he was a Portuguese explorer, and he was the first European to set sail to southern Africa. He landed in Namibia, and this was because of a gale storm that blew him to Namibia. And then he landed in Mossel Bay in Cape Town as well, also because of a gale storm. Now, when they landed in Cape Town, they named it the Cape of Good Hope because he believed that um, it was a hope to find a trade route to India. Also, it was hope for the sailors to refresh themselves. It gave them hope because of the long, long journey that they had to settle. And you must know, at the Cape of Good Hope, they set up the first post of a stone over there. And the sailors used to leave messages under this post of a stone uh, so these messages could go back to their family and they could communicate with them. And this is how the postal service also started. So at the Cape of Good Hope, they also met the Khoikhoi, and they had their first crossbow encounter with Diaz because Diaz and his crew drank water from the stream. And they didn't realize the Khoikhoi tradition that because the Khoikhoi were the traditional owners of the land, if you wanted to drink water from the stream, You actually had to ask permission from them. Had they asked permission, then there would not have been any animosity between them. But obviously, these settlers did not know their tradition. So, because the Khoikhoi were offended, they shot with a bow and arrow at Diaz and his crew. Right, so that was basically miscommunication. Now, the Prado was a similar stone pillar erected by the Portuguese navigators during the 15th and 16th centuries. And it basically was a mark to mark this territory that it now belonged to the Portuguese explorers. So the word Prado means standard in Portuguese. The first Prado was erected by Bartolomeu Diaz in 1488 at Quayahook, near the mouth of Bushman's River at the eastern Cape Coast. So they basically marked their territory and said, this is Portuguese land now. Now, Diaz died in the 1500s. Now we're going to look at Vasco da Gama. He was another explorer. He picked up a local navigator in Kenya to find a trade route to India. And the monsoon winds basically blew him across the Indian Ocean, and they soon arrived at Calcutta. Now, if it wasn't for the monsoon winds that took them to Calcutta, they wouldn't have found it. Now, he did not have anything valuable to trade with the Indians, so the Indians basically became very suspicious of him, and they didn't want to trade with him, so he left India. And on his way back, half of his crew died because of lack of food and also because of scurvy, the disease, because it wasn't very clean. Now, he returned home a hero. Even though he didn't trade anything, he returned home a hero. And the reason for this was because he found the trade route to India. And this led to great economies being built later on. So the king gave Da Gama a fleet of ships to go and put their mark on in India and to find the trade route. And he basically left with 4 ships the second time. So the second time was basically a military expedition to take over India and to take over the trade route as well. Right, I hope you enjoyed this lesson. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I hope you benefited as well. Bye, everyone. Have a good day.